Okay, welcome everybody to this final plenary session of the main day of Genesis 2020. It's obviously been a very different year for lots of us, and we've taken stock of lots of things. And through the course of the day, listening to the sessions, we've heard about how technology developments are changing what we do, how our behaviors are changing and shaping, and just about everything else in the world shaping what we do has been different. So I'm delighted for the closing plenary that we have what for many now for Genesis has become almost a tradition of a panel discussion that's a bit wide-ranging and a bit left field, but lots of perspectives around what does the future hold and what will shape our industry. And I couldn't think of anyone better to lead us through that than Lisa Urquhart from Evaluate Vantage. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa, and I'll see you all later.
Thank you very much, Tony. As Tony said, I'm Lisa Urquhart, the editor of Evaluate Vantage, an online service looking at the industry. I'm joined today by a very, very esteemed panel that will hopefully be taking us all the way from the misery of 2020 to what hopefully should be sunnier uplands in 2040. I like to think of these sort of sessions as the crystal ball gazing sessions because we're looking into the future, and the best thing about these sort of things is the fact that nobody's going to come up to us in 20 years' time and say we were wrong. Anyway, so joining me, as I said, on my panel, I'm going to start off by introducing, since we've got Claire Scantlebury, the Director General of Europa Bio. Claire, give us a wave. Europa Bio represents over 18,000 biotechs and SMEs across Europe. I'm also joined by Vicky Louis, CEO of SLA, the Society for Laboratory Automation and Screening, who should be able to give us an idea of what research the future might look like. Hakan Goka, he's our money man, who should be able to give us an idea of investing trends and what we might be looking at or where money might be flowing to in the next 20 years. Jason Malad, who is the CEO of Start Colon, the Cambridge-based healthcare accelerator. So hopefully Jason will be able to give us ideas around what small biotechs and innovation is happening in that area. And then finally, I've got Piers Rickett, chair of Eastern SSSAA, oh God, sorry, Piers, Eastern AHSN, the Academic Health Science Network. It's based in Cambridge, and they support the adoption and of innovation. Yes. Well, I managed to do all of my introductions with my mute on, so I'm going to start again. I was saying to panel earlier, I've done this is my third Zoom panel, and this is 3 for 3. So I said, I'd like to call this the crystal ball gazing session.
So Lisa, you weren't muted during the introduction. We heard you.
Oh, great, thank you. Sorry, so my mute button was on. Okay, in that case, I will start over. So in terms of the panel, I'd like you guys, I think I said, give me one big idea that you think might be happening in 2040 to give us an idea, and then we'll discuss from there. So I'm going to randomly pick on Piers. So what do you think your big idea for 2040 is in terms of the NHS?
Thank you, Lisa. I think my idea is connectivity. And by that I mean, information on my or your health much more readily available across a whole load of settings. So on the GP record, on my smartphone, on a collection of smart devices. Perhaps if one of us has got an implanted cardiac device, that's sending out signals, a glucose monitor. So lots of these things already work.
Yeah.
But if you look at how long it's taken to adopt telehealth and telecare, for example, we're not a lot further on than we were 10 years ago. So we're only 20 years till 2040. I think connectivity, these devices talking to each other so that we can share information about our health with the professionals who look after us and have a much more mixed and ready way of accessing health and care when we need it. And equally, the professionals and those who look after us can access us much more easily. So connectivity, that would be my starter for 10.
Okay. I think that's going to be a bit of a common theme running through everything, but I shall move over to Jason. What's your big idea for the next 20 years?
Thanks, Lisa. I was thinking hard about this. It was a good question for you to pose to us. And my big idea is diversity and inclusion. I think that going forward, we're going to see much more of an even spread and representation when it comes to women, ethnic minority groups, who are global majority groups, and in the boardrooms, in the investor seats across organizations. That inclusion is going to open up so many new avenues towards addressing unmet needs that have historically been ignored, particularly things like femtech. There shouldn't be a need for femtech. Women are humans too, unlike the way that they've been treated historically. I also think the same goes for Black and minority ethnic groups in some of the Western countries. And increasingly, we see expansion to Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa, they're going to be the hubs of healthcare innovations going forward. So I think diversity and inclusion by 2040 should hopefully not even be an issue. It should be solved.
Thank you, Jason. That's a very subject very dear to my heart, and yeah, some very wise words that which I'm sure we're going to come back to. Hakan, your big idea.
So I'm going to stick to being the boring biotech guy, and I will say that probably what we'll see more and more of is going to be extending vitality in human healthcare. Okay. And vitality, that there is a, just to expand on a little bit, that there is a lot of talk around longevity, senescence, that goes on for the last couple of years. And I think many of us from the investment field are actually not necessarily extending the lifespan, but actually improving the quality of life and delaying disease emergence in humans. So that's probably my pick for the next 20 years.
I'm not going to be cynical saying that people live longer means there's longer investment opportunities for you, Hakan. But anyway, it also sounds something like Piers was talking about. So Piers picking up on connectivity, which I'm sure goes on to extending healthcare. So we'll circle back around to that point. Vicky, 2040, what does it look like for you?
2040, I think that by 2040, we're going to see AI fully integrated into the research process. And it's going to be one of the many mechanisms that will speed up that process significantly. It's going to be used to manage the masses of data that labs are currently producing and helping those scientists interpret the data more effectively.
Okay. And finally, Claire.
Thanks very much. Yeah, well, as a proud Belgian sitting in Brussels to make my presentation today, I am going to pick much better cross-border harmonization of all aspects of healthcare. We've seen it to some extent with COVID already. A lot of national borders, while they've gone up in terms of travel, they have come down in terms of healthcare, movement of people and equipment to places where it's really needed. And I'd really like to see a lot more of that. And I think that's probably one of the biggest changes we're going to see for 2040.
Which means, well, at some point, we'll get that kind of drags us into the B word, but I think we might try and avoid that for a little bit. If anybody doesn't know what that means, it's Brexit. But anyway, we will come back around to that in terms of connected borders. So judging from what I've heard so far, we've got a bit on longevity and also one on Piers' connected one. So it seems like there is a big technology piece that's going to be happening in sort of 2040. So in terms of longevity and Piers, what you're talking about, digital injection, one of the big things I think we're talking about is perhaps the amplification of health. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm sitting here with my smartwatch on. So what do you think about the application of that sort of technology? Are we going to see more connected healthcare on this? So what does that look like? I mean, Piers, I know you had a few ideas around this.
So I don't know how many apps there are, health apps there are in the UK. It's certainly in the tens of thousands. How many of them actually advance human good? Quite a small proportion, which doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to try to do. I think it's, the NHS has had quite a good approach on this. We're sort of trying to curate an app library and trying to work out, what is a medical device, what is really helpful, what doesn't have traction. I think we have to be much better at guiding the public and citizens and patients towards those apps which really help us and are predictive or helping to manage our care. Because there can be quite a danger of all this stuff coming out and people thinking that it's useful. So the regulation's got to be tight, but equally it's got to be permissive because this stuff, the development of this stuff moves really, really quickly. So I think handle with care, it's a fascinating area. I think we will see more of it, but they have to be integrated with the back end patient record, for example, used in a particular way, and I think sort of slightly handled with care.
Is that something you're interested in, Hakan, in terms of sort of more sort of digital applications around healthcare, or are you still about drug, or is it still about drug discovery for you?
So I was being facetious at the start. So we are, as many of you know, we are the corporate venture arm of the Merck Group, the German Merck Group, and we are a science and technology company as the mothership, and we apply that in the venture arm as well. 400 million investing globally, and part of our investments actually goes into health technologies. So kind of trying to draw the most similar investment that we have done in this space was in a company called Akili Interactive in the US. And although I'm not sure if I should be calling it an app, but it's essentially an iPad. It's a program on the iPad, which has been approved by the FDA as the first, let's call it the electronic medicine for kids with ADHD. So these spaces for certain indications, I think this will move forward as perhaps treatment. Many indications it'll be as follow-up or clinical trial testing, but we will see these increasing significantly over the coming years. I fully agree with Piers. Okay.
And what does that mean for, I don't know, one of the things we were talking about, I think in the earlier discussion was, what does that mean in terms of access to these technologies? That was a big thing in terms of inclusion. I don't know, Jason, do you have a thought on this one? You know, will we get to the point where we have digital haves and have-nots in 2040, or do we think there might be steps we can take along the way to avoid that?
Definitely, I think we have a great digital divide that permeates our society on multiple levels. We've even seen it with COVID. There's something as simple as homeschooling. There are numerous children who don't have access to broadband, don't have access to smartphones, despite us believing that they're ubiquitous. And so if our healthcare platforms of the future are increasingly digital, and we really want to drive inclusion and make sure that everybody has access, we need to come up with new models, because it can't simply be, well, if you're wealthy enough or have access to afford a laptop or an iPhone or whatever the device might be, or an Apple Watch, then you get to get cutting edge healthcare access. Perhaps there's a room for a new model. We've seen this in multiple industries where the hardware is farmed out for free and you lease time on it. So maybe in the future, we're going to be increasingly seeing Apple, I'm talking to you, Apple, if you're listening, Apple Watches and iPhones free for everyone, so that we can give people access to some of the amazing applications that are being launched to ensure that they have access. We've heard of things like Facebook and Google trying to increase broadband access using weather balloons and other means. Increasingly, by 2040 in the future, hopefully broadband will be seen as a right and not as a privilege. And access to these technologies will also be wrapped up into that same vein.
Okay. Jason, I'm there showing your socialist credentials there, even though you said you're not. So Vicky Lewis, one of the things we talked about, like, you know, we talk about application of healthcare on the sort of individual patient level. What's happening in terms of technology advances on the research front? Because I think a big thing about this year, I know we're not supposed to be talking about 2020, is the fact that we've seen some pretty startlingly fast drug development. I mean, we've seen the COVID vaccines that have been 10 years of so-called development compressed into 10 months. And then that must be down to also advances in research technology. Is that, I mean, what do you see the future from what's happened from this year? Sort of like, you know, is that going to continue into the future?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and a big question is how do we take these lessons we've learned this year, take the experiences that took place, and apply it to research broadly when we're not trying to solve just one problem. Our members are the providers of lab automation equipment, and they have had a year like no other. The need to automate that research process was forced to be in a speed that those labs probably couldn't have anticipated, but had no choice but to follow. When you couldn't have people in the labs, or you had to really limit the number of people there, and yet there was still this huge demand for science to move at a speed at which it's never moved before, that's when you have to start implementing automation techniques and equipment. And they did, and we've seen much of that effect, just as you said, seeing a vaccine that normally would take 10 years to develop take 10 months. And I think this is a great thing. You know, I think the labs realized that they can adapt to changes in automation and improvements in automation, and that it's not such an intimidating thing, and that it's a resource that they should be investing in.
I mean, people often, when we talk about automation, they get kind of sort of scared, like the robots are coming for our jobs. Yeah. Is this the case? I mean, is it the case? I mean, or the other argument is the fact that it's about assisting humans rather than replacing them. I mean, what's your experience of this, Vicky?
Yes, we hear that as well. What the automation allows to happen is it allows those scientists to spend their time on other things, to spend their time looking at that data that those robots are producing for them, rather than doing the robotic work, rather than hand pipetting into microplates. There's, that's not probably the best use of a scientist's time with years and years of experience and lots of degrees. So let's give those scientists the space and the time to use their knowledge and use their experience the best way possible. And that is how we will see advances happen in drug discovery at much quicker speeds than what we are used to experiencing.
Okay, and that's an interesting point. Now that we've seen what can possibly be done with the pandemic, like I said, a vaccine in 10 months as opposed to 10 years, will there be an expectation from the public that, if you can do it in vaccines, why don't you do it somewhere else? I don't know, Claire, have you got a thought on this?
Yeah, that was in fact something I was pondering earlier when I was looking at the questions we were discussing. And I'm not sure, obviously the situation that we have now required an extreme response. And there was something in it for every single person to go, we need a vaccine and we need it as quickly as possible. When you move away from a medical urgency like that, I'm not sure you'd keep the same level of momentum across that, because a lot of national competitiveness was put aside to work towards this together, to ensure that it hopefully will be distributed fairly. I suspect that a lot of those competitive edges will then come back again, because you've looked at, we've had previous huge international programs around antimicrobial resistance, for example, and they have generated a huge amount of goodwill and willingness to work together, but they haven't broken away from a lot of the competitive edges of things, because although that is also an immediate crisis, it appears less apparent to people. So I suspect, rather than really big runs at the market for a specific technology that everybody can get behind, I think hopefully what we'll see is a lot of the pathways left behind the COVID push, such as accelerated regulatory approvals, accelerated liberation of financing and scale up for particular technologies. I would love that to be applied to other things, rather than expect to see another huge globally harmonized push towards a small set of outcomes.
Okay, and Jason, Claire's saying that that we should temper our expectations, but do you think now that the genie's been out of the bottle, and this goes to Jason and obviously Piers, now the genie's out of the bottle in terms of people thinking, well, maybe we as sort of people that understand the industry better, but do you think people might be slightly disappointed just as farmers kind of started to win the trust of people again? I don't know, Jason or Piers, which one of you wants to go first?
Piers, you can go ahead.
Okay. I think there's lots of factors here. I think what Claire said about it being a sort of multinational emergency, hopefully we won't have something quite as bad as this that will require this kind of mobilization at scale for a while. I think regulators could certainly learn a lot for this, but don't forget just how hard guys in farm will be working 24/7 for the best part of the year. This isn't a normal working environment, so I think some of that expectation probably needs to be tempered in the future.
And just to add to what Piers said, I think that there are some global challenges off the back of climate change and other things that we've identified that could use with this kind of focused effort across borders, that I think we could actually push some of those initiatives forward. Not everything is going to be amenable to that, but some of the large challenges that face us universally, regardless of where we are and where we come from, I do think that we should continue and look for the next COVID scale project. Now, my big concern actually is how many young startup companies that I see that pitched to Start Code on that pivoted hard towards developing their own brand of a COVID solution. Millions, if not billions, were spent on everybody in panic mode. And fair enough, it was a panic situation, saying, well, do you have anything that's even remotely related to COVID? Here's 500 grand. Pivot your company in that direction. There'll be a bit of a hangover as a consequence, because it can't possibly be that hundreds of individual vaccine programs that were funded this last year are going to compete with Moderna and Pfizer and AstraZeneca. So what happens to those companies and the opportunity cost lost? So it needs to be a balance between grand challenges, but hopefully more time and consideration for how we approach them.
Okay, that's a very good point. Hakan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so Lisa, this is a very good question that we have been also mulling this over within the team here, that we have seen this significant speed of getting let's call it a drug approved in a record time. What we haven't really gotten to see is as of yet that as as Jason said, people, as Jason's peers said, people have been working unsustainably long hours because of the panic situation. And we probably also saw it in our work that when you start, working from home, kind of barriers disappear, the days start and end, it's one big circle. But what we haven't really, at least I haven't seen the data on that yet, is that how costly this has been. And there has been a lot of pressure on pharma from payers, from governments, that costs should be reduced to allow broader access to innovative medicines. In this panic situation, I think budgets were parked. A lot of companies received a lot of funds. A lot of companies utilized their own funds to really get to a solution very quickly. I wonder if that's actually sustainable from the cost side. To really get to this kind of speed in addressing drug development. On the regulatory side, we all very happily saw that regulators stuck to their guns on waiting for the right data before approvals went through. So that has been a pleasant fact. I think one thing that perhaps we could learn, and pharma has been doing this already, is to actually earlier on, perhaps pharma working together in areas of difficult drug development. And we have done it from the Merck side. I can't speak for the mothership, but I think all of you have seen the news releases over the past couple of years. We collaborated with Pfizer on avelumab and with GSK on bintrafusp. To really bring more hands, brains, and cash to the table to get these drugs to the patients as fast as possible. So perhaps that can be an angle that we can all look forward to when the next challenge arrives.
That's an interesting point, because I remember, Vicky, when we were having our discussion, we talked about the fact that a lot of the work around COVID has been done without any regard to patent estates and that collaborative thing. And we were discussing, will we get to a point where we've hit a kind of sort of pharma hits the altruism wall and wants to start seeing returns, because at the moment a lot of these things are going to be sold at cost. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on some of your thoughts around that, Vicky.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to see pharma completely relax their IP policies and protections like they have this year moving forward. And they probably shouldn't. That being said, I do think that we've been able to demonstrate that there is a way for collaboration to take place in an environment that advances drugs and other treatments and doesn't completely obliterate a pharma company's assets when it comes to IP. Again, it's one of the many, many things that we've learned this year that can go forward and can speed up that process of research.
Okay. So, I'm going back to the investment piece on all of this. So are you saying, Jason said about the fact that there is going to be money that will never, ever be recovered from this. Does that mean that in terms of, will people be more sort of, wary of jumping on bandwagons, or do you think that, we saw a lot of companies whose share prices went up immediately as soon as they said they're working on a COVID vaccine. So do you think we will learn the lessons of sort of a measured approach to, emergencies, or do you think people will still just be, there will be a way of making money out of panics? Jason or Hakan, if you want to answer that, or anybody else.
Maybe I can give it a go if Jason is okay with that. So, humans are humans. We like excitement. We like new things, and we care. A number of those investments were, of course, done because people really wanted to make sure that they were doing their bit to help get to a drug that could resolve the pandemic. Nonetheless, this behavior is not new. Those of you who have been in the industry know that at various times over the last 10, 15 years, as soon as new innovation came through in biology, companies started pivoting to that, attracting investment. And did they really have the best possible platform or technology for that. Perhaps some of them didn't, but that's, you know, I don't think we'll see a change in that. We actually, as a firm, took a decision that from the investment point of view, we're not going to do any investments in the COVID space. That A, it is not in our strategy, it's not in our corporate strategy, and B, we agreed with the mothership that they will actually utilize their expertise as a pharma company who has enough capability to give it a try from the assets that they had in-house, and also supporting companies with their input from the manufacturing side that comes through the Millipore aspects to the drug development side that actually help multiple companies get to their deliverables on the COVID space. But I don't think we'll see a change of behavior.
So Jason, are you going to disagree with Hakan and say some of the perhaps the younger companies you're working on are going to know better by 2040? Or not?
Oh, I would love to disagree with Hakan, but I think he's right. There is a herd mentality that comes with just being, you know, the human condition, and it means people like to jump on bandwagons because they think it either is safer or is more likely to secure them a future when it comes to, you know, financing and investment. I think unfortunately in the VC community, there's also a bit of a herd mentality. People tend to follow hype. It was nano back in the day. Even now it's AI. I think to Vicky's point, AI is such a powerful tool, but I remember when I went out pitching in my previous company in California, after about 5 pitches on a roadshow in California and in the Bay, the number one question they kept saying, but are you using AI? And after a while, I just started saying, yes, we are. And they went, oh, this is fantastic. Of course we'll invest. And you realize that too often we get shoved into those lanes where it may not even be necessarily applicable to what we're doing. It's just because we're concerned that if we don't say, yes, I am working on COVID, that you might miss out on being funded. And then you're stuck working in an area that may not best suit your needs. So I think it needs to come both from the venture side as well as the actual biotech community and the founders themselves.
So unfortunately,
Lisa,
we're still riding bandwagons by 2040.
If I may clarify my comment a little, actually. So, you know, we have seen a lot of technologies that made a lot of sense. But as we looked into how we would actually try and develop those in the clinical trials through the paths, it became very quickly very obvious that small companies were not able to follow the changing environment in COVID. You know, for a moment, you had to do your trials in China. By the time you engage your CROs were closed. So, I mean, how are you going to do that? Then the next thing, you know, you guarantee your CRO, the whole pandemic moves to another location in the world. As a small company, that becomes very challenging, both logistically and from a cash management perspective.
Okay. So try to avoid bandwagons, but it seems like it's inevitable. Piers, in terms of, I mean, one of the things that Hakan was talking about was moving technology and the adoption of technology, and Jason as well. Sometimes, you know, you'll get to a point, you try to adopt technology. You've got a lot of experience of trying to get technology adopted into one of the biggest healthcare systems in the world, or free to access anyway. So in terms of what do you think is going to happen in terms of, we're seeing lots of technology, like we're talking about AI. How is that going to be adopted into things like the NHS in the future?
Yes, so many of you will be aware of the NHSX AI fund. So the PM and the Secretary of State, when was it, last summer, committed £250 million to an AI fund. And they've set that up, you know, they've taken the time to set up what they mean by that, ranging from, you know, algorithms that haven't yet been proven, but that are quite promising, through to partnerships like the Moorfields DeepMind thing. You know, there's an existing partnership. How do you roll it out more widely across the NHS? So I think yes, that will come. But the reason I sort of chose connectivity at the start of this is because I think I would be much more excited if I thought that the infrastructure that accommodated some of these sort of sexy new tools, as it were, was being built and that would enable them to interact, so we can actually see improvements in access and improvements in real health. The clever guys with the new stuff, I think, will always find funding, you know, whether it's personalized medicine and cancer, the tumor agnostic therapies, AI and robotics, that sort of thing. So I think that will come, and it will come in the right context. But what clinicians want to see is real world evidence that it works.
Claire, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, because this is, you know, I completely agree with Piers on this. And I think what we've certainly learned from working across different fields, and obviously going right back to the Human Genome Project teaches you that underlying infrastructures to generate and manage data to enable these things to work well are not something that can be developed by an individual small company or individual large company. Those are huge global projects to get right. Because obviously once somebody has data that is not interoperable with somebody else, that data is inaccessible. Yes. And certainly we've seen a lot, when I was working back in the day in the nanotechnologies industry, trying to compile data that was interoperable around nanomaterials characterization was almost impossible. Every single stage, something would go wrong. So I would love to see global projects on managing how data underpins everything. And we only need to see the hack this week of the European Medicines Agency to show that this is going to be held online. It has got to be as secure and trusted as possible. Otherwise, people are not going to put their data in it.
Yes.
So there's a huge job to do that underpins this kind of project to enable these really cool technologies.
There seems to be two strands to what you're talking there. We're talking about the idea of sort of like data security and data interoperability. The other thing and also, again, like cross-border collaboration. And one of the biggest things we've seen in 2020, which I hope we're not seeing in 2020, is that kind of idea of more sort of healthcare nationalism. Because the whole idea is about connectivity and, big data projects that span, countries. How do we go from what we're seeing now, where people are turning inward in terms of trying to protect their technology and IP around healthcare, to actually going to a 2040 solution where we're all, sharing everything across borders and all have robots to look after us? I don't know.
I kind of have to jump in there because sitting from where I've looked, I've seen less healthcare nationalism from the things I'm looking at. We shipped in Belgium, we shipped our patients over the border to Germany when our hospitals became really full. So I have seen more coming together of healthcare systems than sort of pulling apart. So I actually think we've broken a barrier with this to say we can do this, and we can point to the benefit immediately in terms of saved lives. And one of our members the other day was just talking about how they want to set up international travel cards for patients with rare diseases, so that instead of having to build rare disease capability in every single country, that you enable the people to go where there is a critical mass of capability for them. And that's what I would love to see so much more of.
Unfortunately, that brings us to the awful B word. So, Claire, you're sitting in the lovely position of sitting in Europe, where, you can travel across borders. I think for myself, sitting in the UK with Piers and Jason, and I suppose also Vicky, where, we aren't quite there, two countries where, we haven't been quite so collaborative. What do you think it does? What do you think it's going to mean if we do have kind of sort of like, a block where you can do that, and then you've got perhaps two other major healthcare groups that maybe aren't quite so interested in integration? Do you think that's going to slow down progress as we move towards 2040? I don't know who wants to take that. Jason, do you want to take it? You've got a foot in both camps. Lived in America and lived here.
Yes, and I love them both dearly. So I thought of that out before I start to criticize the systems. But I think just real quickly, they always say necessity is the mother of invention. And I think this is going to be one of those cases where barriers are going up, but you can't stop the wave of digital health, telemedicine, and everything else that's been kicked off at the back of COVID. We've seen early detection is key. We've seen that telemedicine is key. We see that people don't want to necessarily stop being socially distant, and that'll carry on for quite some time. So what that means is we already know people are traveling for, let's say, pursuing medical care overseas. That will not stop. It started off with plastic surgery and cosmetic things, is now going to more serious surgery. So health tourism, I think, is going to be a big booming industry once we start traveling again. I think telemedicine and telehealth will cross borders as well. And as long as the regulations are permissible to it, I think it will be looking for what's effective and what's affordable. And so if that means that your x-rays are going to be analyzed in India, if that means that you're going to be phoning up the NHS, but maybe you're phoning up someone in the Philippines, those barriers will still be lowered, despite the fact that physical barriers and travel and international barriers are starting to come up with Brexit. So I think that all of us who are on the ground have a will to continue increasing the connectivity that everyone was talking about, and that cross-border collaborative nature that Claire's referenced. And we're not going to let something as silly as a decision as Brexit has been stop us.
And I suppose in a sense, coming back to you, Vicky, Do you think, I mean, in terms of, Jason's got a very great point, the fact that digital information can flow anywhere it wants. But do you think, in terms of the geopolitical situation, do you think the change of administration in the US might, I don't know, impact the changes in healthcare in the US? I mean, we've seen some sort of interesting sort of executive orders by Trump in terms of things like international reference pricing. But do you think now that we've got a change in administration, the sort of that more insular view of healthcare might change as well?
Yes, I think we're going to see the U.S. Move back to the directions we were taking when President Obama was in office. And likewise, there's a lot of repair work that needs to happen within the country and on behalf of the country and its relationships with other countries. And that has an impact on everybody's healthcare. You know, we have a very different system here when it comes to healthcare than most of Europe, and it is in constant debate and has been for some time. I think now what we will see more of are actual conversations happening between policymakers to put forward policies that make better sense, rather than one person just with a swipe of a pen doing whatever it is that they felt they wanted to do on that particular day.
Okay. And in terms of keeping on the international theme, do we think in terms of all of healthcare has to be paid for at some point? So in terms of the earlier stage of innovation and paying for that in terms of venture financing, where do we think the money is going to be flowing from? Because one of the things that there's been a theme along the conference today is the fact that we're seeing money coming from different parts of the world. Like the US is perhaps taking, well, it's still the biggest funder of the healthcare sector, but we're seeing inflows from other countries. I don't know, Hakan, is something you'd like to speak to? I mean, who's going to be funding healthcare in 2040? So
I can maybe contribute towards the venture investments on that side. So since the what's famously known as the CFIUS ruling in the US, European companies
might not be familiar with that. Sorry, Hakan. I know.
So CFIUS is I don't now recollect the exact expansion of the terminology, but essentially a kind of double checking of source of investments in key areas of technology that has been requested by the U.S. government to ensure that national security is not threatened. And there is a parallel one in the U.K. The name totally escapes me. That is being put into place. So since the CFIUS was introduced, there has been an increased inflow of investment to European companies, especially from large funds from eastern part of the world rather than the West that we have been used to, because they just could not deploy their investments in the US any longer with the ease that they wanted to. I mean, there were a bunch of legal risks that I don't necessarily want to get into here, which meant that you couldn't really guarantee the return for your investment. So people shied away from that. We saw that as a beneficial thing for European companies, which have historically attracted less money than the US companies in the private setting. And we expect to see that actually growing over the coming years, since there has been also a lot of returnees. I'm talking as Europe as pre-Brexit, perhaps, from the US for various reasons over the last couple of years that also helped build the expertise and management teams with significant high-moving, let's say, fast-moving biotech experience back into Europe. So we see that increasing as the years are going by.
Okay. So you were saying more sort of investment perhaps from the East. I mean, Jason, you had a thought on about that, we were talking about, funding arrangements in the UK are going to change because we won't have access to European funds. I mean, Hakan was saying some of this might be sort of replaced by, investment from China. Where do you see funding for the UK and European biotech sector coming from in the future?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Hakan said. I mean, I think the world is becoming increasingly flat from that standpoint as well. Historically in the UK, you've had young companies that can only grow to a certain point, and then when they're looking for scale-up financing, they end up being acquired by typically an American multinational. And that's been kind of the exit model for UK biotech industry for too many years. We're seeing now, especially with Brexit, a lot of EIF-backed European funds that are stepping away. Increasingly, we're seeing US investors and Asian investors get in touch with us in particular to look at our companies. But what's particularly different this time is rather than saying, oh, we're just having a look-see because we're hoping they might be acquired by one of their existing portfolio companies, they're saying we want to invest in them in the UK to grow and scale in the UK. So the next idea after that would be, do we have the talent to actually grow and scale? That's the next big bottleneck. So now investors are willing to back companies here, and I think across Europe as a whole, to grow and scale increasingly rather than just exit quickly. But you need to have the talent that can actually take that capital and turn it into the next crop of unicorns. So I do think that increasingly the investment is going to be coming, to Hakan's point, from East Asia, as well as in particular from US investors looking for good deals here in the UK and here in Europe. But we've got to make sure that we have the talent at the table to actually make the most of it.
And what do we think about how are we going to get that talent in, I don't know, in 2040? So, Piers, you had an interesting statistic about the fact that we're going to be down something like, and worldwide, we're going to be down 18 million healthcare workers by something like 2030. So what does 2040 look like if, how do we get those people back into, service our systems of healthcare? Piers, do you want to answer that one?
Today is an interesting day to be discussing this, obviously. I suspect that in the long run, Jason is right about it being all right, and because we need flows of talent and money, to where the infrastructure is, it will come eventually. We'll get over this. I think the immediate worry is in researchers and healthcare workers, because if you look at the stats about the numbers of NHS nurses and doctors who come from, whether it's EU or outside the EU. Addenbrooke's Hospital, Cambridge University Hospital, is just up the road from our office. They had a flag up about a year ago which said one hospital, 89 nationalities. Well, they have lots of flags. I think the worry over the next 3 to 5 years is it's partly talent, it's partly the workers that we need to deliver our health and care. I think there's I suspect there'll be a short-term blip in that. But I think you've got a couple of obvious medtech unicorns in the UK, so companies like Oxford Nanopore or CMR Surgical, who perhaps once, they've got very driven founders, perhaps once upon a time they would have taken the US acquisition route. They've both sort of got above that stage now. So I think in the medium to long term, I think it's promising.
Okay. And in terms of attracting that kind of sort of because I don't know, I mean, are people still being attracted to the life sciences in terms of career choices? I don't know, Claire, do you want to take that one? Because I mean, something that's we're going to need in 2040 if we're going to deliver on all this innovation. We're going to need people that actually want to work.
Really interesting. While Piers was talking, and I was thinking about the diversity question again, because often when you look around, there's a sea of very similar faces, and that's not okay. Biotechnology is a frontier technology, and it should be reflecting all aspects. I'm a big Star Trek fan, so I'm like, biotech should boldly go, but it needs everybody to boldly go with it. You can't just have, old white guys in suits boldly going, because that's, you've lost 80% of your talent pool. So it's all about maximizing how people gain access to meaningful careers inside life sciences. Because you see now that, huge number of women graduate from life sciences things. They are an absolute majority, and they drain out of the system as it becomes higher and higher. And there is something catastrophically wrong if you are losing half of your brains out of the system. Not only is it wrong from a societal perspective, it's also economically stupid. So I think it's not about finding extra people. It's about looking at the people that you have and enabling everybody to get onto that ladder for a meaningful career. And I think, unfortunately, still a lot of things need to change for that to come true.
Jason, I mean, obviously not for certain reasons. Anyway, I remember we were having our discussions when I was saying, I remember the first time I saw Jason, I was so excited because, I don't come across people that look like Jason very often. I mean, the hair's amazing for starters. And as I said, the first time I saw Jason, as soon as I figured out he wasn't waiting staff, because normally when Jason and I go to events, the only people that we see of colour tend to be handing around the sandwiches and the drinks. But anyway, Jason, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to second everything that Claire just said. And I think really, again, I said at the top of the discussion, inclusion to me is going to be the absolute most disruptive innovation of the next 50 years. The fact that there are so many talented people who have not had access to the education or to the opportunities to really leverage their talent. The fact that we're going to be expanding our markets. We're looking for new markets for drugs. We're looking for new markets for innovations. The best way to do that is to make sure that we increase the quality of life and the standard of living for everybody across the planet. That's how you create your user base. That's how you create the customers of the future. And that's how you find the talent pool who are going to create the innovations of the future. So of anything that we can do beyond AI and CRISPR and all these amazing technologies, simply opening the doors to more people and more brains and different points of view is going to be, in my opinion, by far the most disruptive and innovative thing that we can do. And that's what I'm looking forward to more than anything.
And do we think companies are doing enough? Because we've seen, I mean, I don't know if it was a result of the Black Lives Matter, but suddenly pharma realized that a lot of their customers were actually people of color. So I think we've seen companies like, I think it would be Bristol Myers Squibb, I think J&J, I think they've just done they've done quite a lot of investment. Yeah, J&J and BMS have both pledged something like 100 million in the last year over new diversity programs. I mean, but I was thinking to myself, what does that mean? I mean, where do you think we should be focusing? We've got extra funding for diversity. Where do you think we should be putting that money? I don't know, Claire, do you want to have a stab at this one?
That's a big question, because of course, you know, that sort of thing, we've got to spend 100 million. That's a KPI in itself, but you could spend that and make very little difference. You know, you could tick it and report it in your board meeting and in your annual reports. It's like, but unless you actually say we have X% more women, X% more people from, you know, different ethnic minorities, you haven't actually moved the dial. So I think a lot of companies talk the talk, but I think it's difficult. You know, I look at my own team and it's like, we're all white. I'm like, how do we go out of our way to encourage more diversity and enable it? And it's not because we don't want to. It's I think we need a lot of education ourselves in how to do this. Just chucking money at something isn't necessarily the answer.
Yeah.
Hakan, you were going to say
something. I think that's a very, very fair point. But as we talked about the human condition, I think that was the term that Jason used. You know, we try to kind of fix what comes up as the issue immediately. But I don't think this is a kind of thing that you can fix within a day or a week or a year. You know,
we got to 2040, Hakan. So, you know, with blue sky thinking, you've got another 20 years.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I think, you know, if we want to kind of fast forward to 20 years, I think what needs to happen at least, and I'm probably the least, you know, the least able to kind of give an opinion here, but you know, when I look at our team or how diversity works in our team here of 30 people, then I look at Merck, which is, you know, which is in Darmstadt, perhaps not the most attractive place for people to go to. But, you know, how we handle it is that in the search processes for recruitment, we go very broad and we keep a very open mind about, you know, people's backgrounds and not just just color or you know, countries or whatever. We literally look at, you know, the acumen that they can bring to the team, which should be the same everywhere. But if we really want to represent the plethora of people more broadly, what needs to happen is that at that level of recruitment, you need to have the number of people that are suitable for that job as well. And to be able to do that, you need to start from education and then move that up to enable a lot of people to actually reach the same level of education, so that they're in the recruitment pool to get to those positions. And that's not an easy thing to do over a day. So some of it, I guess, is a bit of window dressing. Some of it is honestly felt and people are acting on it, which is great. But it'll take us perhaps another generation actually to get there.
It looks like 2040 is looking good. Vicky, I mean, Hakan was saying about the fact we need to grow our talent. Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah. So SLAS has been working with an organization here in the United States called the National Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. And we're in the process, I can't say too much at the moment, but we're in the process of developing a program that addresses exactly what Hakan just said. And in our conversations with major pharmaceutical companies, they've all had DEI programs for years. They have all said that their biggest challenge has been that the pool is very small that they're going to try and meet their DEI goals. So what we're working on with Nobuche is to address that exact problem and start looking at how we can help students, high school students, young kids of color get into those STEM fields and stay in those STEM fields.
I think for me, I mean, I've told my own experience, my own personal experience. You tend to look at organisations and you think, so would I feel comfortable there? And I think that can be a big problem in terms of where we're starting from now. Because if you go to an organisation and nobody looks like you, it's quite difficult to think, am I going to fit in here? Am I going to thrive here? So I think that's maybe some of the inclusion pieces we need to do. I don't know if Jason, you want to speak to that as well.
I think representation is key. I mean, Lisa, I couldn't agree with you more. And although it will take time, and I think, Vicky and Hakan made really, really key points that it has to start from the ground up. It's not just that suddenly overnight you say, oh, there's all these people available to fill all these roles and suddenly we're inclusive. At the same time, part of it is for those of us who do look a bit different from the norm, where there's female CEOs or people of color in positions of influence, that representation matters. Even having this very diverse group here on this panel, there's going to be somebody out there who didn't think that they would ever be able to do it themselves. They will see us here and they'll be inspired. And we have to all be advocates out there, making sure people know that we exist and that they can do it too. So I am applauding not only the fact that we're here, but also the Genesis for having the foresight to say, we're going to have a panel and we're going to make sure that it has a broad swathe of people to represent, what the world really looks like. And we just have to keep doing that. And the next generation will finally see that not only do they have access to the education, but that it's possible. They do belong.
Yeah, that's Hakan.
I guess it's been a long day, so I kind of took you guys on a tangent earlier. But the question was, what do you do with that money that is being promised to invest? And I guess that's why I brought up the education part, that money is perhaps best utilized to enable people to reach their full potential, whatever that may be. And then part of it is also used to make sure that as children are growing up, or teenagers, whatever stage of age one is, that you have the right kind of exposure, which is actually even more difficult to influence from online, from online social media platforms to TV to adverts. You can try and make some of those reflect the where you want to be, but some others will not happen. So I guess part of the money could be used there, and that's where probably I should not use the word, but some governmental or non-profit organizations could actually take some of that funding to give the message that diversity is a good thing and gets you to actually achieve your goals, hopefully a lot faster and a lot happier.
Jason, you wanted to come in, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to really quickly add on a kind of, if we take a step back around away from gender and ethnic diversity, let's talk about the type of education that we're giving students. I'm finding that I go to a lot of universities where I'm mentoring or speaking to some of their life science programs, and I look at the students, whether they be undergraduates or postgraduates of the future, and I wonder, how many of you are learning the skills that are going to get you a job? Just full stop. So we also need to think about, for example, automation is everywhere. My partner, he works in a automated biomarker discovery lab that 20 years ago would have employed probably 30, 40 people to do what they do today with 5, because there's robotics. But they had to learn how to program those robots, how to do the bioinformatic analysis of the data that's coming through. Those are skills that we have to make sure that the next generation are learning today, as opposed to retrofitting them and thinking, oh, you're learning how to pipette. Well, that's wonderful, but do you know how to program a Hamilton robot? That's going to be what gets you the job of the future, not being good at pipetting for your Western blot. So we have to also make sure the skills we're teaching are going to lead them to where the industry is headed.
Okay, so we've got a bit of an education piece to do in terms of actually matching sort of education to actual job requirements before we get to 2040. Anybody else like to come in on that? Piers, I thought you were nodding there, and also Claire. Piers first.
I think what Jason says about role models is incredibly important. There are a number of very high-profile female scientists now in the UK. Sarah Gilbert on the Oxford vaccine, for example, who have quite a lot of media exposure, and I'm sure that will have, said to girls that they can come into science when they might not have thought that. I think some of the more significant challenges. Our two children are 14 and 12. Fortunately, my broadband connection is holding up, but they all want to become YouTubers. So it's this. As Jason says, we can't be too sort of enthusiastic about putting these messages across of role models at all sorts of different levels.
Okay, Claire, would you like to add anything about in terms of the
I can of course fully agree, as my two teenage sons fully intend to become incredibly rich by becoming YouTubers any day now.
My daughter does too.
But I think one thing I've really learned is about engendering the passion for the science, because I've never had a job that I knew even existed, all the way through my career, and I'm pretty old now. But a lot of kids are often very conservative in how they see pathways going forward, and people still see science as something you do with a lab coat on in a lab. And I think we need to do a lot more work about using the figureheads that we have to say, look at all these cool jobs. I don't work in a lab, however, I use my science to do all of these things. I think there's still a disconnect between what people anticipate science being and what the amazing plethora of jobs are around it. It's so exciting. So we do have a job to do there as well.
Okay. I'm trying. Hakan, one last thing. We're getting
actually.
So I mean, this could be the last chance to say whatever your piece is about.
Sorry, I'll be very quick. I talked too much on this one. So I actually was thinking that the pandemic has actually given a bit of a silver lining to how much exposure there has been to biomedical research and medicine and also the support staff in healthcare that we haven't had for at least, as far as I remember, in my adult lifetime. That I think will hopefully get the next generation to refocus on technology and science and medicine.
And going back to that point, do you think people are now sort of not only sort of more interested in science, because I think on one of the last sessions somebody said science has moved from the lab to the living room, because pretty much everybody I now know is now a vaccine expert. So I mean that's one of the good things. But we've also seen people that are basically even more skeptical about science. So could 2040 see the people that have embraced science they've seen the amazing innovations, and the people that perhaps think that Bill Gates is going to be controlling 91-year-olds that have vaccines? So I mean,
leave this to the last 2 minutes of debate.
That's a bigger societal challenge, I think, that goes with wider political populism. If you read some of David Goodhart's books, it's a much wider thing, I think, that governments have got to occupy themselves with.
Yeah.
So perhaps that money that goes into education can increase. Okay. I think it's also about education.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. So we come towards the end. Is there any one final thing for anybody wants to say quickly before I start summing up the vast ranging sort of chat that we've had today? I'm not sure if we got to 2040, but we kind of meandered around the houses in a very interesting way. Any last thoughts from everybody about the future? Okay.
I'd say do it together. Stop putting barriers up.
Okay, very good. So thank you very much for our panelists. We've had a very great time. From what my take on the future is, robots aren't going to take our jobs. They're going to assist us. The future is going to be a lot more diverse, hopefully, if we get the initiatives right. We're going to have more amplification and adoption of digital health, but we also need to see some leveling up in terms of access to that technology. And but it's all looking pretty bright out there. So I think, unless there's any questions of the audience, I think we're pretty much done. So thank you very much, everybody. That's been a great discussion.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you to the panel. I think it was such a wide-ranging discussion, but the thing that kept coming out to me was a word called accessibility, whether that was access to capital, access to, or making our sector accessible to the next generations of talent, access globally to the innovative products we can make and how that's got to work. And just being open and human beings. And I think we've seen great examples of that across borders this year, as I think Claire pointed to. I hope we see more of that. And Jason, you mentioned the word about being inspiring. Well, I think you group too. So keep doing it, I guess is my plea. But thank you very much for the panel's insights and candor. And I look forward to catching up with you all in person soon, I hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that takes the day here at Genesis towards its close. And one of the things that we've celebrated a lot at Genesis over the years is good news, because we should be said, there's been lots of good news this year as well as lots of challenges, just the whole speed of things. So we have something called the Bio News Round Award. And really that's to recognize people doing good things, but it's also communicating the good things they're doing, because that builds confidence in other people to do those things. It's that role model effect, and that encourages others, build confidence from investors and policymakers. So on that basis, that's what the award is for. You'll see on the slide the people who've made it through to the final of that, and many of you at the conference have been voting for them throughout the day. And I'm delighted that obviously we come out, someone has to win, but this company's won really because being able to go out and raise capital has been a record year for that in the sector. But the ability to go out, do a NASDAQ IPO, that means they've got more investment to then invest in innovative research and supporting the sector, but also getting involved in big strategic things like the UK Antibody Task Force that has given them an awful lot of leverage there too. And they continue to trade up after the IPO. So it really is a success story. So I'm delighted to announce that the winner of this year's Bio News Round Award, and we will get a physical award to them at some point, is Abcam. And I'd like to welcome Michael Bullock from Abcam to at least virtually accept the award.
Great. Well, thank you, Tony. And thank you all. This is very exciting for Abcam, so thank you. First and foremost, I'd like to offer a big round of applause to all the other shortlisted companies for their significant achievements during this very challenging year. Our secondary listing on NASDAQ was an important next step for Abcam as we talk about capital raising. It gave us access to the US capital markets, allowed us to raise $180 million, which we're going to use to facilitate greater growth, and has enabled us to build strong partnerships that will underpin successful delivery of our long-term growth strategy. Like Genesis, this listing was an entirely virtual process, sometimes painful, but it was executed successfully in just under 6 months from start to finish, despite the challenges of COVID. And I have to say, we had a great, very supportive group of banks and people who worked with us to get it done. And sometimes I think it's harder to do stuff virtually than live, but they did a stellar job, and we at Abcam are greatly appreciative for that. So thank you once again to One Nucleus for this Bio News Round Award, and sincere thank you to all of you who took the time to vote for us for our US listing as this year's award.
Thank you, Michael. And I wish you lots of success going forward, because I think we all benefit from that.
Thank you.
So just finally from me, I'd like to, if we can have the next slide up, just to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a part of the One Nucleus family. And that's the way we often look at it. So I guess from my perspective, I'd just like to briefly explain what it is that we seek to achieve. One Nucleus is lucky to be custodians of a fantastic network. But that means we can come together and connect and share knowledge and raise awareness of what everyone's doing. We've heard a lot today. It's about people and teams. And one of the things coming up next year will be our careers conference about building adventures in life sciences. And I'd really encourage people to get engaged. How do we attract the best talent and nurture the best teams and let people realize their dreams? And then as well, another pillar for One Nucleus is about support and enabling people to do deals, ease their spend, and linking that ecosystem together. And today's been a great opportunity and showcase of that. So I'd like to thank all of the speakers we've had at Genesis, both the ones on the platform, but also the ones on the on-demand and pre-recorded sessions that have gone on, and the workshops over several days, and they will continue after today. Thanks to all the sponsors of the conference and all the supporters, and our network and you as participants. So that's very important to us. One thing I'm excited about for 2021, and we'll be launching this more formally in January, if we can go to the next slide, will be our Virtual Innovation Centre, touching upon that part of One Nucleus being this huge network of really, really valuable knowledge and capacity and capability and influence. Then we kind of figured, well, there was a role, if we could bring the breadth of that ecosystem to play to support companies coming out of accelerators like Accelerated Abraham, Start Codon. Can we support them to grow even quicker? We've got some great international collaborators, and you'll see there on the screen some of our corporate sponsors and partners involved with us in this, really trying to give a springboard, not just for startup, but for rapid growth, becoming international, becoming sophisticated deal makers, helping to recruit and nurture the right people and leadership. So that's something to watch out for in January 21, as we look forward to what I hope is going to be a better year in all sorts of ways. But at the same time, this year's been a very steep learning curve, and we've engaged with so many people over the course of the year. You can't even count them. And it's been great to be able to gather and not be disconnected, even if we're socially distant. And the final slide, I think one of the things that I'd like to finish off with, I have a great and supportive and informed board that help guide us on the right track. And these are the people on the screen now. This rogues gallery you'll see is the One Nucleus team. We didn't get the chance this year to be there in person to mingle with you, and you get to know the members of the team. You'll find out more details about each of them if you go to the website and check out the team and what they do. But it's just my thanks to them. It's my privilege to lead them as chief exec. And that's been a pleasure this year. Even though it's challenging, it's the way they've worked as a team has been fantastic. So thank you to those. Thank you to everybody for helping make Genesis success. I look forward to seeing you either in the innovation workshops coming up between now and Tuesday, the form of the satellites around Genesis, or indeed throughout 2021. Thank you very much.